Sometimes life feels like it's moving at a slower pace than we want, and we find ourselves asking, when is my breakthrough going to come? We wonder why we have to wait, why things aren't moving the way we think they should, or why we're stuck in a season of delay. But I want to encourage you today. God will lift you up in His time, and His timing is always perfect, even when we don't fully understand it. We often get caught up in our own schedules, wanting things to happen on our timeline. We live in a world that demands instant results, where we can get fast answers and quick fixes for almost everything. But God's way isn't always about instant gratification. He's not bound by the same limitations we are. God sees the bigger picture, the beginning, the middle, and the end. What feels like a delay to us is actually a divine appointment. He knows exactly when we are ready, and He knows the right moment to lift us up. Trusting in God's timing means understanding that He's orchestrating every detail of your life, even when it feels like nothing is happening. The waiting process isn't wasted time. We may feel like we're sitting on the sidelines watching other people around us get ahead or receive their blessings, but God is working on us in the waiting. It's in these moments that He is shaping us, building our character, and preparing us for what's next. There's purpose in the pause. He's refining us, teaching us patience, and strengthening our resilience so that when He lifts us up, we'll be ready for the responsibility and the blessing that come with it. You're not just passing time, you're being prepared for something greater. Waiting isn't a passive process. It's not about sitting back and doing nothing while we wait for God to act. It's about actively strengthening our faith, trusting God's promises, and believing that He's working behind the scenes on our behalf. Every moment of waiting is an opportunity to build the foundation for the breakthrough. It's an opportunity to grow closer to God, to learn to lean on His understanding, and to trust that He is faithful to fulfill what He has promised. God is doing more in you during the waiting than you realize, and when the time comes for your lifting, you'll see that the growth you experienced in the waiting will make all the difference. One thing we often forget is that God lifts us up when we humble ourselves. Humility is key in this process. When we let go of our need to control everything and admit that we don't have it all figured out, that's when God can move. It's when we stop striving in our own strength, trying to make things happen on our terms, and instead surrender our plans to Him, that God can step in and do what only He can do. When we humble ourselves before God, He promises to lift us up at the right time. It's not about our ability, it's about His grace. And when He lifts us up, it will be in a way that glorifies Him and shows the world that He is the one who makes things happen. The most important thing to remember is that your season of waiting is not wasted. God uses every moment, every struggle, and every season of delay to prepare you for something bigger. Even when you feel like nothing is changing, God is at work. He is shaping you, refining you, and positioning you for your breakthrough. When the time is right, He will lift you up, and it will be worth every moment of the wait. Trust that God is working behind the scenes, and know that His timing is always perfect. He will lift you up in His time, and when He does, it will be exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. So keep trusting, keep waiting, and keep believing your breakthrough is coming. God's timing is perfect even when we don't understand it. One of the most challenging aspects of faith is learning to trust in God's timing. We are a people who live by the clock, always measuring our days by deadlines, appointments, and expectations. We want things to happen now. But what we must understand is that God isn't bound by time like we are. He sees the full picture, the beginning, the middle, and the end. He's not just concerned with the destination, but with the journey and the process that prepares us to reach that destination. We may feel like we're stuck in a waiting period, wondering why nothing is happening or why our prayers seem to be going unanswered, but God doesn't work on our timeline. He knows when the right time is for everything. The delay we might perceive is not a denial of His promises, it's part of the preparation for the blessing He's about to release. Sometimes God has to allow us to wait because there are things He needs to develop in us before we can handle what He wants to give us. Our hearts, our character, and our faith need to be ready to carry the weight of His blessings. Think about how many times in Scripture God's people had to wait. Abraham waited for the promise of a child for years, decades even. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. David was anointed as king, but he didn't step into the throne immediately. He went through years of challenges and struggles before God elevated him to the position he had promised. Each of these people had to trust that God knew the right time to fulfill his plan for them. We can take comfort in the fact that God's timing is not random or accidental, it is purposeful. When we don't understand why things are happening the way they are, we can rest in the fact that God is never late. He doesn't miss a moment. The delay isn't a reflection of his inability or lack of concern. It's a sign that he's working out details we cannot see. He's aligning things, preparing us, and setting everything up for the right time. When God moves, it will be at the moment when everything is in place, and we will see that his timing is not just perfect, but the only perfect timing. The more we lean into God's timing, the more we begin to see how much we can trust him. It's in those moments when we're waiting for an answer or for a breakthrough that we learn to rely on him more fully. Instead of rushing ahead, trying to make things happen in our own strength, we start to trust that he knows the best course of action. And when the breakthrough does come, we'll realize that it was worth every second of waiting, because God's plan is always far greater than what we could have imagined for ourselves. So, when you're in the waiting season, don't lose heart. Know that God's timing is always perfect, and the wait is part of his divine preparation for something greater. The waiting process is not just about enduring time, it is about preparing us for the purpose God has for us. Every season of waiting has a divine purpose, and though it may feel uncomfortable, even frustrating, it is never wasted. We often see waiting as a barrier, something that holds us back or delays our progress. But in reality, God uses these seasons to refine us, to shape us, and to make us ready for the blessing he is preparing for us. Waiting is a time of transformation. Just like a seed must be buried in the soil before it can sprout, we too must go through a period of being hidden and developed before we are ready to bear fruit. In these times of waiting, God is cultivating our hearts, expanding our capacity to receive and manage the blessings he will eventually give us. Sometimes we may want to rush through the process to skip ahead to the finished product, but if we were to do so, we would miss the growth that happens in the waiting. It's the stretching, the refining, and the preparation that ultimately allows us to handle what God has for us. God's plan often requires us to go through seasons where we are not yet able to fully see the outcome, but trust that he is working behind the scenes. It is in these times that he teaches us to rely on him. He teaches us patience, trust, and obedience. Waiting teaches us to let go of our own timeline and trust in his. It teaches us that his ways are higher than our ways, and that his understanding of timing far exceeds our own. In the waiting, we learn that it's not about rushing to the finish line, it's about trusting God to lead us through the journey step by step. Additionally, the waiting process strengthens our character. It's in the moments when things don't go according to our plan, or when we're in a season of uncertainty, that our character is truly tested. We are faced with the opportunity to grow in faith, to persevere when it feels like nothing is happening, and to remain hopeful even when it seems like the promise is far off. This growth is necessary. If God were to elevate us or bless us before we were ready, we might not be able to handle the responsibility or the weight of it. The waiting time is where God is building endurance in us, preparing us to carry the blessings he has in store. He's teaching us that our faith isn't about instant answers or quick results. It's about holding on to his promises even when we can't see them yet. There is beauty in this process if we choose to embrace it. God uses the waiting to deepen our relationship with him. It's in the quiet, in the stillness, that we find ourselves seeking him more, leaning into him more, and discovering more of his character. Waiting draws us nearer to God. It refines our hearts so that when the time comes for us to step into the blessing he has for us, we can do so with a spirit of gratitude, humility, and a deeper understanding of his faithfulness. So don't despise the waiting. Embrace it. It is in this time that God is doing something in you that will make you ready for everything he has prepared for you. Every delay has a purpose. Every moment of waiting has value. When you look back, you'll see that this season was not wasted. It was exactly what you needed to step into the fullness of God's plan. Waiting is not just a passive act. It is a powerful opportunity to strengthen and deepen our faith. In moments of delay, God invites us to actively trust in His promises and to hold on to the assurance that He is always at work, even when we cannot see it. We often find ourselves in seasons where things aren't moving according to our expectations, and it's easy to become discouraged. But this waiting period is an invitation to lean into God more than ever, to deepen our trust, and to remind ourselves that His timing is perfect, even if we don't fully understand it. When we are waiting for something, whether it's a breakthrough, an answer to prayer, or a new direction in life, we're faced with a choice. We can either allow our doubts and frustrations to dominate, or we can choose to stand firm in faith. It's in these moments that we must remind ourselves of God's faithfulness. The same God who has been with us in the past, who has seen us through every trial, is the same God who will see us through this season of waiting. Waiting gives us a chance to reflect on how far we've come and how God has been faithful every step of the way. It gives us the opportunity to look back and see that even in moments when we didn't understand what was happening, God was still at work in ways we couldn't see at the time. Strengthening our faith in the waiting isn't about just hanging on until the breakthrough comes. It's about intentionally choosing to trust that God is working in the background, preparing us for what's ahead. There are lessons to be learned, growth to be experienced, and patience to be developed in this time. It is a season where God is building endurance in us. He's teaching us that our faith isn't just about receiving immediate answers or instant results. Real faith grows in the waiting, when we can't rush things or force outcomes. It's when we have to completely surrender our timeline to Him, trusting that He knows what's best for us, even if we can't see the full picture. Moreover, the waiting process often reveals areas where our faith needs to grow. It exposes the places in our hearts where we're tempted to take control or rely on our own strength rather than trusting God. In those moments of tension, God is refining us. He's teaching us to trust Him not only for the big moments, but in the small, everyday details of life. Waiting doesn't just help us see God's timing, it helps us see where we still need to grow in trusting Him. It's an invitation to let go of our worries and control and allow God to develop our faith in a way that lasts long after the waiting is over. As we continue to wait, our faith becomes stronger. Each day of waiting is a step toward greater trust in His goodness. And as we choose to remain faithful during these times, we become more rooted in the truth that God's promises are true and His timing is always perfect. We're no longer waiting with uncertainty or doubt, but with the confident hope that God is doing something in us that we can't see yet. Waiting, when approached with faith, becomes a powerful season of growth. It's not just about what we're waiting for, it's about what God is doing in us while we wait. Our faith is stretched, strengthened, and refined so that when the time comes for our breakthrough, we're not only ready for it, but we are able to fully appreciate it because of the work God has done in us. God lifts us up when we humble ourselves, and this principle is crucial in understanding how His timing and plans unfold in our lives. Humility is not just a virtue, it's the posture of the heart that allows God to move in us and through us in the most powerful ways. It's easy to get caught up in a mindset of self-sufficiency, thinking that we have to make everything happen on our own or that we can somehow control the outcome of our lives. But true elevation in God's kingdom comes not through our strength or effort, but through our willingness to surrender our pride and acknowledge that we need Him. When we humble ourselves, we acknowledge that we are not in control and that our own plans, desires, and abilities fall short without God's intervention. Humility is an act of trust, a declaration that we believe God's ways are better than our own and that His timing is perfect. It's in this surrender that God can step in and begin to work in a way that glorifies Him, not us. We must recognize that He is the source of every good thing in our lives. Our success, our achievements, and our breakthroughs are not the result of our hard work alone, but of God's grace, favor, and provision. When we allow ourselves to operate in a posture of humility, we make room for Him to move in us in ways we could never accomplish on our own. It is also in our humility that we invite God to take us to greater heights. When we release our need to control the situation, God is free to lift us up in His time and in a way that is far beyond what we could have imagined. The act of humility creates space for God to elevate us with His blessing knowing that we are capable of handling it because He has prepared us. Often, when we try to lift ourselves up or force things to happen on our terms, we end up stumbling or burning out. But when we choose to humble ourselves, we position ourselves to receive God's elevation in a way that is sustainable, aligned with His plan, and full of His peace. Humility is also a recognition that everything we have and everything we are comes from God. It's a reminder that He's the one who gives us the strength, the wisdom, and the resources to move forward. When we take credit for what God has done, we block His ability to continue blessing us. But when we acknowledge Him in everything, when we give Him the glory, He lifts us up to places where we can truly fulfill the purpose He has for us. In a world that often celebrates pride and self-promotion, humility can feel counterintuitive, but God's ways are different. The world says that we should strive to elevate ourselves, to prove our worth, and to always be in the spotlight. But in God's kingdom, He promises to lift up the humble. He says that when we humble ourselves before Him, He will exalt us at the right time. This doesn't mean we make ourselves insignificant. It means we place God at the center and trust that He will make sure we are recognized and elevated in His time for His glory. When we practice humility, we begin to see that true greatness is not about being at the top or being in control, but about serving others, loving deeply, and being faithful to the call God has placed on our lives. As we humble ourselves, God lifts us up not just in a worldly sense, but in a way that aligns with His eternal purposes. His lifting is not just about position or status, it's about maturity, character, and the ability to serve others with the gifts He's given us. The more we yield to His will, the more He raises us to the place He has designed for us to impact the world around us. So if you find yourself in a season of waiting or feeling overlooked, remember that God is watching over you. His timing is perfect. When the time is right, He will lift you up in ways you never expected. Trust in His process, remain humble, and know that in due time God will elevate you. It will be His doing, and He will make sure that everything works out according to His will and for your good. Humility is not a sign of weakness. It's the very thing that allows God's power to shine through in your life. Your season of waiting is never wasted, even though it may feel like time is standing still. In our fast-paced world, we are often conditioned to believe that progress must be constant and immediate. But God doesn't operate by the world's standards. Every moment, every trial, every delay has a purpose, and He uses these seasons to shape us, refine us, and prepare us for something greater. Just because we cannot see the immediate results doesn't mean that God isn't at work. Often when we're in the middle of a waiting season, it feels like we're in a holding pattern, unable to move forward or achieve the things we've hoped for. We may feel like nothing is changing, and it's easy to become frustrated, wondering if the things we're praying for will ever come to pass. But the truth is, God is never idle. Even in the times when we feel like we're just waiting, He's doing something deep inside of us. He's developing patience, building our character, and strengthening our trust in Him. He's aligning the circumstances, the people, and the opportunities that will be necessary for the fulfillment of His plan in our lives. God is never wasting our time. Every challenge, every moment of waiting is part of the preparation for the future He has in store for us. Just like a runner trains for a race, sometimes the waiting period is where God is strengthening us, helping us build endurance for what lies ahead. If we don't embrace the waiting, we miss out on the very work that God is doing in us. The season of waiting is a season of growth. It's a time to develop the inner strength, resilience, and wisdom we'll need when we finally step into the promise. Furthermore, waiting helps us become more aware of God's timing, which is always better than our own. When we rush ahead, trying to make things happen in our own strength, we can easily derail what God is doing. But in the waiting, we learn to rely on Him more fully. We discover that His timing is not random, it's perfect, and it aligns perfectly with His plan for our lives. It's often in these moments of stillness and waiting that we become more in tune with God's voice. We start to learn to trust His direction even when we can't see the whole path. We may feel like we're just standing still, but God is actually preparing us for what's next. It's also important to remember that God's definition of wasted time is very different from ours. What we view as setbacks, delays, or roadblocks may be God's divine protection or preparation for something greater. Sometimes we think we need to move quickly, but God knows what we need and when we need it. He doesn't rush us because He knows that His perfect timing is worth waiting for. The waiting process teaches us to trust that when the moment comes for the breakthrough or the promise to be fulfilled, we will be ready to walk in it with maturity, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of God's goodness. As we look back on those times of waiting, we'll see that they were not wasted after all. They were part of a greater plan, a process that God used to mold us into the person He needed us to be in order to handle the blessings He had prepared for us. And when we step into those blessings, we'll realize that it was the waiting that made us stronger, wiser, and more capable of fully receiving them. God uses even the most difficult seasons to refine us and to teach us valuable lessons that we couldn't have learned any other way. No season is without purpose, and no moment of waiting is ever truly wasted in His hands. So if you find yourself in a season of waiting today, remember that God is working in you and through you, even if you don't see it right away. Trust that He is preparing you for something greater, and that every delay, every challenge, and every moment of waiting has a divine purpose. God is always at work behind the scenes, and when the time is right, He will reveal the fullness of what He has been preparing. No season, no matter how long or how hard, is ever wasted in His plan. You are being shaped for something far greater than you can imagine. Trust the process and know that the best is yet to come. In conclusion, we must understand that God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels like we are waiting endlessly for breakthroughs or answers. The process of waiting is never in vain. It is a time of growth, of deepening our trust, and of building the character we need to carry the blessings God has prepared for us. Even in the moments when we feel stagnant or frustrated, God is working behind the scenes, aligning everything according to His plan. Through humility, patience, and faith, we position ourselves to be lifted up by God when the time is right. Remember that waiting isn't about passively enduring. It's about actively trusting in God's plan for your life. Every moment of waiting holds purpose. Every delay has value, and every challenge is an opportunity for God to refine us and prepare us for what's ahead. God is always at work, even in the silence, and He will elevate us at the right moment when we are ready, when His plan is in place, and when His glory will be most magnified through it all. So as you navigate your own waiting season, let this truth comfort you. God will lift you up in His perfect time. Trust in His process. Trust in His timing. And know that when that moment comes, you will be more than ready to step into the fullness of His promise. Until then, hold on to the hope that God is never idle and your waiting is not wasted. He is always at work in you and for you.